Hello, welcome to the third session about social data science. What we do here in this session is we will provide a comparative analysis of data for good initiatives. So what we learned in the last session was that social data science is a field of heterogeneous initiatives all over Europe, and those initiatives are characterized by volunteers who provide data science services to social organizations in their free time. Therefore, today, or in this session, we would like to go through the landscape, the European landscape of data for good, to provide an overview about the distribution of different organizations all over the countries. Then we will provide more details about the organizations and initiatives itself. So we give you some parameters how to characterize these initiatives so that you get a better idea what these initiatives are about and how they are operating. And then derived from this analysis, we will provide some key indicators that help you to understand or to better understand what the goals and the operations of those organizations are. And then we will sum up the main findings. And at the end of the session, we hope that you have a better picture about the existing data for good landscape in Europe and that you get an idea who is doing what. So starting with the data for good landscape. This is basically a result of the benchmark report that was conducted in our project that was funded by the European Union, and the detailed report is available on the project homepage. So therefore, the benchmark report itself was conducted mainly at NOVA Data Science Knowledge Center in Lisbon. And what we did was we tried to approach the term data science for social good scientifically, and we provide an overview about the initiatives that do operate in Europe and compare it to the initiatives that we found in North America. But here you have to know that we are based in Europe, so we had better access, or we had access to European data. And what we did not do is we did not travel to the United States or to other countries in order to find out about the completeness of this data there. But what we did from our, or what we found out at this web research was the following. What we can see here is we have 47 initiatives in Europe. So 5 initiatives were identifiable by our research in the United States. And then we had in Australia, for instance, or in Thailand, wherever we had one more initiative, so individual initiatives in other countries. So therefore, our focus lies on Europe, and what we can see here that most of the volunteer initiatives are based here. So in order to give you an idea about the initiatives itself, we listed all these initiatives. I don't want to go through the full list here, but what we saw is that in nearly every European capital, we were able to identify an initiative that comprised volunteer data scientists that were who were willed to provide services or their knowledge to social organizations in order to improve the access of these organizations to artificial intelligence or to data science solutions. So what you can see here is that the branding of those initiatives is kind of heterogeneous. So we do have this data science for social good, this DSSG, in different European cities. We also found the name Data for Good, DataKind, Fair projects, or university-based labs, like for instance at the Leiden University. And then, of course, to name Correlate and Data for Good as well, what we have here. Yeah, so these are the biggest initiatives that we found, and what is also common, like initiatives in combination with universities, in order to ensure a kind of contingency, as the universities is a permanent residence. Sometimes these organizations solve problems jointly with universities to ensure that there is a kind of contingency of let's say, services that can be offered. So as you can see, there's a long list of names, and these names are available at our homepage if you in case you are more interested. So therefore, let's go to the key variables that we were able to collect from each organization and initiative in order to provide a benchmark, in order to provide some metrics or some common factors that are relevant to all of these organizations that we were able to spot. So these are the 5 characters, or let's say key indicators, that helped us to characterize and compare these existing organizations. So these 5 indicators are status and legal, general, working methodology, HR and financing, and the impact. So what we found out was like the status of these initiatives was distinguishable between ownership and legal format, because we are dealing here with, or we mainly deal with volunteers who organize themselves. So it's not a central organization that is the same for all volunteers. These organization heavily depends on the country they're operating in, and then on the personal preferences the initiator of these initiatives do have. Therefore, the legal status was one of our benchmark indicator. In general, what is also an indicator for us were the descriptive variables that we could spot, namely the type of partnership each of the initiatives have. So, as I said in the previous session, there are initiatives and they are individually, and they are kind of heterogeneous because of this individual level. Therefore, the services they offer vary individually by individual initiative, and hence the beneficiaries do also vary, because the beneficiaries heavily depend on the person who work there, on the contacts they have, and on the motivation that they do have. Therefore, we summed all the general parameters that we could find in the type of activities or geographical scope under general. And then the working methodology. Here we found that the projects differ by the methodology they were conducted. We already learned that, for instance, one initiative is preferring hackathons. So to say, you scope a problem, you put all the people into one room, give them 24 hours, and let them crunch the data and assess the results or compare the results and provide the best result as a solution to the problem. On the other hand, you could think about projects that last more than 4 or 6 weeks, for instance, like 3 months, and then you have a core team working on the project itself. But here the team constitution is kind of different, because here you need kind of contingency and you need kind of commitment from the data scientists that they stay on board for the full time, although they work in a normal job and do these projects in their free time. So this is basically a huge challenge for those initiatives to manage these issues. Now, on the other hand, we do have the financing and HR key factor or indicator, because here it depends on the size, on the number of employees each volunteer group does have, and on the funding. So how are they funded? Do they have some sponsors from business side? For instance, IBM is for instance a company that sponsors some of those initiatives, or are those initiatives independently and work based on the pro bono activities of the individuals? This has consequences, if you can imagine, in legal terms. For instance, who is responsible for the result? How do you handle a project that is not finished? Or even worse, how do you deal with a project that is not well conducted and provides damage to the organization? So who is responsible here? So therefore, the legal form is also a huge issue when it comes to organize such an organization. And if you remember what we said about the big data properties, here we also have these impact of data privacy, of data anonymization, and data protection guidelines that have to be under control when you work with data. And here you might imagine that this heavily depends on the legal form that you are working on. If you are if your form, for instance, is responsible for that, or if there is someone who is responsible for that, or if it is you as a volunteer who is responsible to answer these questions. So these are all questions that you have to ask yourself when it comes to the organization of such an initiative. And then last but not least, it is the impact. So here we were able to spot variables in order to measure the social impact and the performance of these teams. So here we were interested in the KPIs in general and the social impact, because this is a kind of relevant aspect for all projects. How do you measure the sustainability of your project in terms of the performance? Like how help the project, how helped the work, the data science service that you provided to solve the problem, to improve the problem. So which kind of metrics do you apply here? So now coming to the main findings of our study. So the main findings were, like when it comes to the status, like the legal status, all the assessed initiatives were active, whereas 89% of them were working on a private level. So here, that means that you have private persons who do it in their free time without organizing themselves as a corporate, as a tax relevant organization. Moreover, 93% were declared as non-profit. So that means the idea of providing social data science to organizations that cannot afford a professional data scientist is in 93% of the cases a non-profit initiatives. Yeah, and this is basically these are basically the main findings from our survey to provide a better picture how social data science is organized in Europe. Then on the next slide, we can discuss the general variables that we had. And what we found out is that most of the initiatives, although they are organized or are organized in a way that their names are comparable. For instance, the DataScience4Good has initiatives in every country in Europe, most of the countries in Europe. The same is for Correlate, but they mainly operate nationally. So there's in 68% of the cases of the initiatives, there's no international spillover, although the motivation and the goals and the scope of the initiatives is comparable. 59% of the initiatives were created in the last 5 years. That means, or this goes in line with our findings, that the fluctuation of volunteers is a staggering issue for each of the initiatives. As the typical employee, if you can say so, is a young student or a fresh employee who works in the first 2 or 3 years of his job in his free time or her free time to provide this data science for social good service until issues like family, a job or a new job or a change of city stops this person from providing this service. It is a challenging task to coordinate the high fluctuation of volunteers within each organization. The projects that are conducted have social impact and are relatable to social good in nearly 80% of the cases. And the most common partnership is like the most common cooperation where a volunteer meets a social organization is a data partnership. This means in most of the times that most of the project that we were screening was kind of data partnership in this term. that the organization had an interesting data set, provided it to the data scientists, and the data scientists were able to assess the data and to find out if they can find valuable patterns or derive valuable decisions based on this data ship. And then most projects and events are training activities. That means, especially in order to attract volunteers, most of the initiatives said that the projects are also a good marketing tool in order to attract young volunteers, because volunteers or could be categorized in different personas or in different or can be characterized by different motivation. So what we found out is that on the one hand, the motivation is to do something good. That was the most of the motivation. But you also had the motivation that students or young professionals said they want to widen their horizon and to be part of some data science project, although their background is not data science. And they wanted to provide help by providing help in project management or by getting more experience in programming, for instance, because this was not part of their normal job. Therefore, these motivations were different, and the initiatives took those projects or said that those projects help, or finding concrete projects helps to promote their work and to find volunteers. So therefore, these are the people that you attract with the projects. And the last group that we could identify was the networking reason, that people said they were motivated to widen their network, to get in touch with peers, with their peer group coming from other companies, and also to widen their horizon when it came to programming. Because in terms of digitalization, this is basically a topic that somehow is relevant for everyone from a different perspective then. So the methodology that was applied in all these initiatives is basically similar, or it was kind of similar for most of the project that we could find or that we were identifying in our interviews. In most cases, a typical project takes 4 to 6 months. And this was kind of a challenge, because when you're dealing with volunteers, you have to match the availability of those volunteers with the project available. And when you think about projecting, it is the acquisition of the project that also takes time. And if you acquire a project, you have the challenge that those organizations most of the time don't know how many people are available when the project really starts. Because we have to say that one of the largest challenge of those initiatives was to acquire projects itself. Because if you talk to social organizations, they're losing, or they are spending so much time in getting to know each other, so that the organization knows what the data science need to know, the scientists need to know, and what they do need in order to get a proper project done. And the data science spent a lot of time to explain what they are doing, what their scope is, and how they want to help them. So this is basically kind of time consuming, and this is done before the project starts. Therefore, you really need persons who commit themselves for, let's say, a year in order to get a successful project done. And the project development is kind of different by each organization. And if you have the time, please check the homepages of DataScience4Good and of Correlate and of DataKind. You can see that they have same focus, same scope, but they all differ in their methodology regarding their project development. And just to provide a flavor for the project itself, most of the projects do comprise 6 to 8 team members. So this is basically a normal, in quotation marks, normal group size. And the challenge here is that as we are dealing with volunteers, the knowledge on a project itself is kind of heterogeneous. That means you might have 8 computer scientists or 8 social scientists on board, but the mixture is the key to a successful project. And also the knowledge itself, the knowledge level. So you might have advanced programmers who prefer to work on their own because it does not take much time to do it on your own, and therefore they are not willed to share too much knowledge to their peers because of their time limitations. Therefore, it is also an issue to organize the project adequately when dealing with volunteers and when you have to manage the availability of those volunteers. So the next thing is like the HR and financing. When it comes to the organizations, what you have here is you have to be aware that here are volunteers who do not get paid. Like 90% of the organizations are non-profit, which means that these organizations are need proper funding or need volunteers who do it in their free time without any payment. So the most common funding that we identified were partnerships with the industry or with the project beneficiaries, like in 42% of the cases. And most, so to provide the size or dimension of these organizations, most of the organizations do have between 5 to 13 employees. So we are talking here about, let's say, small organizations who are organized in an international standard because they use data science for social good labels or data kind labels. However, they are kind of individually and locally kind of very small when it comes to the terms of employees. And the organizational structure then consequently differs by each organization. So, and then coming to the last part, it is the impact. So we were interested in order to identify social good if there are any KPIs related to social impact and the performance indicators. And the most likely measure is if you're working in a social good project or if you're working in an association or in an organization that provides voluntarily data science knowledge, is that 79% measure the impact through the results of each project. So they all said in common, what they had in common was they said, like, after the project is done, we are leaving. We are just controlling the result. And like a normal consultancy, then they are out of the project and they don't have any impact measurement afterwards in order to assess the success of their project. And the mostly presented KPI was the number of projects and the number of community members. So if you browse the home pages or if you want to find out about the different organizations, you could check out our project platform. There we do have a European map with all existing organizations. You can browse through those organizations and check how many projects they do have and how many community members do exist. And this is basically the most relevant KPI in order to attract new volunteers, because they get the feeling, or the larger you are, the more you are able to reach. So, and in case of, or in terms of social development goals, you can categorize the projects that were conducted into SDG 3, so the social development goal 3, like the good health and well-being, which was basically the most common social impact area, or also into climate action, which was also common in the project that we were able to screen. So this basically reflects the last 5 years. As you might remember, like the most of the organizations were founded in the last 5 years. So there you can see that these two topics are mostly the key drivers for social projects that were conducted in Europe by European volunteers. So thank you for your attention, and we will stop this session here.